9 a.m. on what should have been an unremarkable morning. The kind of grey, unhurried Tuesday that usually just happens to you without asking. But not today. Today I had something to look forward to. And I know it since last night when I sent that text with my heart sitting somewhere in my throat. I'd asked her if she wanted to go bowling. Casual, low stakes, the kind of invitation that's easy to say no to. She said yes, almost immediately, and something in my chest had settled in a way it hadn't in a long time. I actually woke up glad. That doesn't happen often to take for granted. I took my time getting ready, groomed properly, put on something that looked like I'd made an effort without trying too hard, and drove over to meet her. She was already there when I arrived, leaning against the wall outside with that easy, unbothered energy she carries everywhere. Like she'd never been anxious for a day in her life. Like the world just agreed to be a little calmer wherever she stood. Inside, the lanes were loud and bright and smelled like rental shoes and popcorn. And I was barely present for any of it. She was talking, animated, warm, doing on about something that clearly mattered to her, and was nodding along, making the right sounds at the right moment, while somewhere behind my eyes I was completely elsewhere, thinking about her, watching her laugh at her own story before she'd been finishing telling it. She's so pretty, I thought, so warm, so completely herself. Nobody made me feel like that in longer than I wanted to admit. Like something in me that had gone dim had been quietly turned back on just being near her. Like I'd been missing a frequency I didn't even know I was tuned to. Then her hand landed on mine, and the warmth of it snapped me back into the room. Her expression had shifted. She looked bothered. That particular kind of bothered that means something is wrong, and she doesn't want to make a scene about it. She said we needed to leave now. I didn't ask questions. I just went. We got in the car, and she navigated us out toward a smaller town on the edge of the city. The kind of area with too many side roads and not enough visibility, where intersections sneak up on you and drivers. Treat yellow lights as personal challenges. I white-knuckled the wheel through two of them, quietly praying that nobody clipped us, coming around the blind corner. And then her hand found my thigh. And not deliberately, I think, just the way she naturally reached out when she sensed tension in someone near her. She didn't even look over, just rested her palm there, steady and warm. And somehow, that was enough to make the road feel less hostile. I was just starting to breathe again when the sound hit us. The light was the first thing, blinding flat and completely without warmth. The kind of white that doesn't comfort, it just exposes. I couldn't figure out where I was for what that felt like a long time. My body felt wrong, heavy, in the wrong places. disconnected from whatever instructions I was trying to send it. Then the ceiling came into focus. Then the IV lines run into my arms. Then the steady, indifferent beeping of a monitor that had been keeping track of me while I was gone. I was in a hospital bed. I lay there for a while before I said anything. A nurse eventually came in, then a doctor, and they went through the motion of checking me over, removing the needles, asking me questions. I answered on autopilot. I wasn't really there yet. My mind was still catching up on the present, still replaying the sound of that impact, the way everything had gone sideways and loud and then nothing. I ask about her before I ask anything else. The staff exchange a look, the kind people exchange when they've already had the harder version of this conversation among themselves and aren't sure how to begin the easier one. They guided me down the hall without really answering, which was its kind of answer. The room they brought me to was quiet. She was in a bed at the center of it, and I almost didn't recognize her. She was robbed so fluidly, bandaging covering nearly everything, that the only part of her I could identify with certainty was her hair, spread across the pillow in the one area they left untouched. The rest was gauze and machinery, and the soft sound of assisted breathing. I stood in the doorway for a long time. The night that followed were a particular kind of torture. The waiting room kind, where time moves strangely and every update feels both too soon and not soon enough. I slept in chairs, I drank bad coffee, I watched her parents pace the same 20 feet of corridor over and over, and said very little to anyone. Then one evening, they called us all in together. The doctor spoke carefully, the way people do when they've learned that precision is a form of kindness. The crash had thrown her from the vehicle. The injuries she sustained were severe across every system. Neurological, psychological, everything. She would not regain movement. She would not speak again, or think the way she once had. She was present in the most technical sense of the word, and absence in every sense that had ever mattered. They used the word euthanasia quietly, like lowering something fragile. They said that decision belonged to her parents. They said there was nothing left that medicine could offer her except time, and even time had become a cruelty. Her mother's cry was the kind that doesn't sound human, the kind that comes from somewhere beneath language. Her father had his hands over his face, and his shoulders were shaken in that silent, catastrophic way that men cry when they've spent a lifetime not doing it. One of them doctors had turned away, pressing the heel of his hand to his eye, and even that small gesture undid me in a way I hadn't expected. I don't remember leaving the room. I just remember being outside it, then being in the parking lot, then driving. I don't know where, I don't know how for long. The world she had existed in was simply gone, and where the version of me had been quietly coming back to life around her, warmth went with it. The night I stopped at a shop on the way back to the apartment and bought wine and vodka without thinking about it too hard. I wasn't forming a plan exactly. I just knew I didn't want to be conscious in the way I currently was. I needed the evening to be different from what it would otherwise become. I went to bath as hard as I could, started and climbed in, and let the heat close over me like something permissive. I put on the gentlest music I could find, ambient, wordless, the kind designed to disappear into the background for a quieter life than this one. I started with the wine, slow at first, sipping while the room rose and the bathroom filled with warmth, and the music did its soft, useless work. I thought about her hair on the pillow. I thought about her hand on my thigh in the car. I thought about the way she laughed at her own story before she finished telling it, and how I would never hear that again. I kept drinking. By the time I moved to the vodka, the room had taken on the particular quality that alcohol and heat together produce. A heaviness at the edge of everything. A softness that isn't comfort, but resembled it closely enough to be dangerous. My chest ached. My thoughts were moving slowly through something thick. I don't remember finishing the second bottle. I remember the water, the music going distant, the specific weight of grief that had been sitting on my sternum for days, finally pressing all the way through. My heart was pounding, loud and wrong, slamming against my ribs in a way that didn't feel like living so much as like a machine running past its limits. The room tilted. My body made a decision. My mind hadn't quite caught up yet. The floor came up fast. And then, not death, something else entirely. Something that had no name in any language built for the world I just left. I didn't fall into consciousness so much as get dropped into it. One moment, there was nothing. No bathroom floor, no music, no grief pressing through my sternum. And there was a bed beneath me, and my legs were hanging off at the end, on an awkward angle. Too long for whatever this was designed for. I lay there for a moment without moving, running a system check on myself, the way you do when you're not sure if anything is broken. Everything seemed to be there. That was already more than I expected. I sat up slowly and took in the room. Pink. All of it. A washed out, faded pink that had probably once been cheerful and had since curled into something much quieter and more unsettling. The walls, the carpet, the curtains that hung over a window, I immediately clocked as painted shut. The bed I'd woken up on was covered in plushies, stuffed animals of various size ranges, with the specific deliberateness of a child who had very strong feelings about where things belonged. A small vanity in the corner, shelves with cinematic figurines, a mobile hanging from the ceiling that turned slowly in air that wasn't moving. The whole thing felt like a bedroom, that had been assembled by something that had observed childhood from a distance and done its best. I became aware after a few seconds that I was wearing my winter coat. Thick, heavy, the one I pulled out when the temperature generally warranted it. Paired with baggy pants and my black boots, laced properly, like I dressed for a season that didn't exist here. I had no memory of putting any of it on. I had no memory of most things at the moment, which felt like a problem. I'd deal with it later. I looked through a door. There wasn't one. I walked the perimeter through a room twice to confirm it, running my hands along the walls, checking behind the curtains, looking for any seam or handle or hinge that might indicate an exit I might miss. Nothing. Just continuous wall, continuous ping, the slow turning of the mobile overhead. What kind of room doesn't have a door? The claustrophobia arrived quickly. After that, a tightening in the chest, a sharpening of attention that had nowhere useful to go. I started moving without a plan, just moving because standing felt worse. I knocked the ceramic figurine off a shelf without meaning to. Then I meant to. Then I knocked off two more, and the small violence of it helped slightly, and I hated that it helped. Then I noticed the closet. Large, floor to ceiling, with an ornate little handle that looked like it belonged in a dollhouse. I crossed the room and tried it immediately. Locked. I tried it again, still locked. I rattled it, which accomplished nothing except making noise. And then I stood back and looked at the room with fresh eyes, trying to think like someone who needed to get out of here, rather than someone who was still processing the fact he existed at all. The drawers, I went through them quickly, mostly empty. A few things that didn't bear thinking about, until my hand closed around something that absolutely did not belong in a child's bedroom. An axe? Not a decorative one, not a toy, a full, proper axe. Having enough that I just adjust my grip with a blade that caught the pale pink light and reflected it cleanly. I tested the edge against the wood of the drawer itself. Barely any pressure, and it bit through like a drawer had been waiting for permission. I looked at the closet. I looked at the axe. Alright then. One swing, clean, decisive, aimed at the seam where the lock met the frame. The closet doors swung open on their own. The aftermath, like it had been holding their breath. I stepped back without meaning to, because standing inside, unfolding itself from a space it had no business fitting into, rising to a height that made the ceiling suddenly fell very low, was a figure, entirely black, not wearing black, not cast in shadow, but made of it. The kind of absolute dark that doesn't reflect anything at all. It was twice my height, at least, and it stood there in in the open doorway for the closet and looked at me with whatever it had instead of my eyes. I did not move. Then the sound came. Not a voice, not exactly. Something closer to distortion. The way a signal sounds when it's being transmitted through something it was never meant to pass through. The room's ambient hum shifted around it, and somehow, impulsively, I understood that. Hello? What? May you have brought Kitty a gift? I stared at it. You have a kitty? The figure was still for a moment. I am Kitty. I took a step backward. It made a sound that I will not describe in detail. So I managed, after a moment, gripping the axe handle hard enough to feel my pulse in my palm. You're Kitty. Yes, sir. And you want a gift? Something you'd like? That I really like, yes. It hadn't moved since stepping out of the closet. It was just standing there, filling the corner of the room with its impossible height and its absolute darkness and its terrible patience. Not threatening, not yet. But the way it waited felt like something that had learned, waiting for a very long practice of it. I kept the axe in my hand. I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do with it. I looked down at the axe in my hands and made a quiet, private decision. This wasn't leaving my grip, not yet. Not until I understood a lot more about this room and the thing standing in it. Whatever Kitty intended to do with a weapon that could split hardwood into a gentle touch was information I wasn't ready to hand over freely. Can I look around first? I said carefully. Find something you might actually like. I want it now. I paused. The figure tilted its enormous head almost gently. Does that mean you don't have a gift for Kitty? I looked around the room. Really looked at its time with the specific desperation of someone taking inventory under pressure. The plushies were a lost cause. I knocked most of them off the bed during my initial spiral around the room, and a couple hadn't survived the encounter with the floor particularly well. The somatic figureness I swept off the shelf were in pieces. The drawer I next opened was in worse shape. The room that had arrived already unsettling now looked like someone had proceeded a significant amount of anxiety inside it, which was accurate. I had made a mess. There was no dignified way around that. I like a little surprise, Kitty said, and the distortion in her voice carried something that might, in another context, have sounded almost playful. May it come out of your hands. I looked at my hands. Right, inventory. What did I actually have? My gloves, thick winter ones, slightly worn at the knuckles. Not exactly a compelling offering. The axe, which I already decided about, and then tugged into inside pocket of my coat. something I hadn't consciously registered until this moment. A small bottle of vodka, mostly full. I had absolutely no memory of putting it there. But given the night I'd apparently had before arriving here, its presence felt almost logical. I held the three options in my mind and then assessed them honestly. The gloves were ugly, functional but ugly. The kind of thing you buy because they are warm, not because they are worth looking at. The vodka bottle wasn't much better. The glass plain and utilitarian. Nothing about it said gift. The axe though. I looked at it rapidly, for the first time since pulling it from a drawer. Really looked. The blade was clean, well weighted. The handle was smooth, grained that it caught the pink light of the room and held it warmly. Whoever made it had cared about the making. The proportions were right, the balance was right. Even the small details along the head had been done with intention. It was objectively a beautiful object. I've been holding a beautiful object the entire time and treating it like a crowbar. I thought about what Kitty might do with it. I thought about what Kitty had done so far, which was standing very still and asking me very politely for a gift. I thought about the fact that it was standing in a pink room, with no door, in a place that had no name in any map I've ever seen, and that, in my opinion, were limited in ways that made negotiation the more appealing strategy. Here, I said, and I held the axe out, handle first. Kitty's enormous dark hands closed around it with a care that surprised me. Not snatching, not grabbing, but receiving. The way you hold something you've been hoping for. The distortion stretched, wrapped, resolved into something almost breathless.
It's so beautiful. I love it.
She wasn't performing. That much I could tell. Whatever Kitty was, she wasn't lying to me in that moment. The axe I'd found at the bottom of a child's drawer, the one I'd used to break a lock and nearly kept as a weapon, was to her exactly what a perfect gift looks like. The craftsmanship, the weight, texture of it. She turned it slowly in her hands, like she was mesmerizing it. Then she stepped past me. I didn't flinch, but it was near a thing. She moved with a surprising quietness for something her size, crossing the room to a far wall and raising the axe in one smooth motion. She carved into a plaster with deliberate, practiced strokes, down, across, down, across, until the outline of a doorway stood cut in the wall. Then she drew her foot back and kicked the section cleanly out. Beyond it, pure black, not darkness exactly, something more complete than that. She turned back to me, and the distortion came one more time, softer, with something in it that I hadn't heard before.
I can't thank you enough. How lovely you are. I may wish you a great night.
I stood at the threshold, I looked into the black and understood in a very fundamental way that I had no idea what was on the other side of it. But Kitty had not harmed me. Not once. Not even I'd broken half her room and swung an axe at her furniture. She asked politely and waited patiently and thank you and whatever she was that counted for something. I stepped through. The floor was not there. The drop took everything. My breath, my voice, my stomach. And then gave back only speed and darkness and the sound of my own screaming shadowed by a void that had no interest in returning in it. I felt through nothing at all, the air filling around me until even that was gone. Until the failing itself stopped feeling like the falling and became something else entirely. Something from I didn't land so much as arrive. One moment, the falling had swallowed everything, and the next I was moving through water, cold, clean, impossibly clear, pushing upward by instinct until my head broke the surface, and I was gasping in a space that was absolutely not where the fall should have taken me. I treaded water for a moment and looked around. A pool, vast, still, the surface broken only by the ripples, and made coming up. The water was a pale, washed out blue that caught the light in a way that almost felt normal. Almost. Except that the ceiling above it was low and institutional, and the walls that surrounded it extended outward into corridors, branching in multiple directions, like a system of channels something had designed without finishing. The concrete walkways ran along the edges, just wide enough to move through a single file, disappearing around the corners into a silence that had no good reason for being that complete. Every path looked exactly like every other path. Every direction looked like it led to more of the same, more walls, more water, more corridors, falling back on themselves. Patterns that resisted being mapped in your head. I hauled myself out of the pool and stood dripping on the hot walkway, water running off my coat in sheets. Somehow, still fully dressed, still in boots, still the coat, still everything, soaked through now, which was going to be deeply unpleasant, but present. I picked a direction. There wasn't a better reason to go one way than another, so I just walked. The first thing I noticed, a few moments in, were the walls. Someone had been at them. At regular intervals along the corridor, the concrete was damaged, not crumbling with age, not cracked from pressure, but scooped like something had its surface with tremendous force and dragged downward, leaving a clean vertical groove in the material. The edges of each mark were sharp. Whatever had made them had done with intention, or at least with a very specific kind of force. I ran my fingers along one, without fully meaning to. The concrete inside the groove was cool and smooth, like the impact had compressed it rather than broken it. I kept walking. That's when I noticed the paintings. They began gradually, small figures first, rather than pigments that had no business being this vivid in a place like this. Ochre and deep red, and a blue-black that seemed to absorb the light around rather than reflect it. As I moved further along the corridor, the figures multiplied, spreading across the wall in a continuous sequence that clearly wanted to be read left to right, like pages. I slowed down. I started paying attention. The story the walls were telling was not a comfortable one. It opened with a king, depicted larger than anyone around him, crowned, seated, clearly aware of his own significance. Beside him, rather with unusual care and detail, was a bull, enormous, magnificent, the kind of animal that gets remembered. The king hand rested on his flank in a way that communicated ownership and perhaps something closer to pride. Then, a crowd. People with their hands out, their postures demanding. The king's posture in response was closed, turned away. The body language of someone had decided before the conversation began. He wasn't giving the bull whatever they wanted it for, whatever they were owned for, believed they were owned. Their answer was no. Then, a gap in the wall. One of those scoop vertical marks cutting straight through the narrative. I stopped and looked at it. Whatever had happened in that section of the story was missing now, removed by whatever force had made these marks, and that absence set in the sequence like a held breath. I moved past it and picked up on the thread on the other side. The crowd had redirected their attention, not toward the king this time, but toward the woman, his wife, from the context, depicted with a crown of her own, an expression that the artist had rendered with uncomfortable specificity, a kind of softness around the eyes that didn't belong in a political sense. Something was being done to her, administrated almost, a substance, a ritual, something that moved from the crowd's hands into her awareness, like smoke. A hallucination, I realized. They were giving her a hallucination. And its subject, based on the next panel, was a bull. Another scooped gap, another section gone. I walked faster now, more invested than I wanted to admit. The village had turned. That much was clear from the next surviving section. Figures with their backs to the king. Postures that communicated their unified, collective rejection. The king himself was smaller in these panels, shrinking across the sequence in a way that felt deliberate. He was weeping one image, actually weeping. Tears rendered as small, careful marks running down his face, while everyone around him turned away. He ran. The next image showed him running. I didn't blame him. And then the queen, birth scene, partially obscured by another gap in the wall. But what survived on the other side was enough to complete the picture. What she had carried, what she had delivered, was not what the queen was supposed to deliver. The scoop section were covering specifics with a thoroughness that felt almost merciful. What emerged was a calf, half human in the way it was depicted, the proportions wrong in the specific ways that myth tend to make things wrong. And around this figure, the remaining villagers were drawing back, not in fear exactly, but in the particular way people draw back from something that implicates them by proximity. The queen was executed. A single image, stark and unambiguous. The king returned. He built something shown in cross sections, a structure that went downward, levels descending below the earth in careful architectural detail. Corridors, chambers, a labyrinth designed not for navigation, but for containment. And at the center of it, the calf, grown now, larger in proportions increasingly wrong, increasingly specific ways. Alone, except for the figures that appeared in the outer corridors. Prisoners from the way they were depicted. People who had already been designed as expandable and were now serving a different purpose. The final image was the king again, standing above the structure he built. Looking down at it, his expression in the last panel was the hardest thing to read. Not triumph, not grief exactly. Something in between. The face of someone who has made every decision, led here, and is now living inside of his results. Beneath the figure, in a careful lettering, I had to lean close to read. The Towers of Minos, the king who made him. I stepped back from the wall and stood with it a moment. The Minotaur, obviously. I'd heard the story in some form or another. Everyone has, but seeing it render here, across these walls, in pigments that looked like they'd been applied recently, the painting still carrying a faint chemical freshness underneath the aesthetic of antiquity, was something different from knowing it abstractly. The panels were too vivid, the colors too saturated. Nothing about this looked like it had been here for decades, let alone centuries. I filed it that away and kept moving. The corridors opened slightly as I went further, and I became aware of light, actual light, warm and directional, filtering through a row of windows set high in the concrete walls. I angled toward one and looked up. Sunshine, real, honest daylight, pressing through the glass with an intensity that made the pool room's interior look dim by comparison. But the windows were too bright to look through directly. The outside world, whatever it was, burned white and featureless through the pans, giving nothing away. I was on the ground, technically. I knew that, but the light didn't care about technicality. I started looking for anything useful. The same instinct that had served me in Kitty's room. Check the drawers, check the corners, take stock of what this place is willing to give you. What this place was willing to give me, it turned out, was a slug gunshot 12 gauge. Leaning against the wall in all cloth, like someone had it sat down for a moment and not come back for it. I picked it up and checked it the way I'd been taught. Action, chamber, condition of the barrel, functional, loaded. The kind of weapon that demands respect before it demands anything else from you. I spent enough time at the range to know what this thing felt like when it went off. The recoil on a 12-gauge slug isn't something you observe so much as something you negotiate. You have to be planted, weighed, distribute correctly, brace in a way that comes instinctively only after enough practice. Fired wrong, and it will punish you. Whatever was in these corridors had scooped those marks into solid concrete. Whatever made a labyrinth, but to contain it, didn't know yet if his shotgun was going to be enough. But it was considerably better than an axe I'd already given away. Something moved inside the wall. Not water, not the settling of concrete, but pressure. Rhythmic and deliberate, and getting louder, transmitted through the tabular infrastructure of the pool room, like a message being sent specifically to me. Whatever was there was forcing its way through, and it was not small. I didn't wait to find out what it looked like yet. Instead, I moved. The pool room's labyrinth worked against me immediately. Every corridor looked like every other corridor. Every turn opened onto another stretch of walkway flanked by still water and concrete walls. And the geography I thought been quietly memorizing dissolved under pressure into nothing useful. I was lost within 30 seconds and started to run, which meant whatever was coming had the home advantage. I slowed down. Running blindly was going to get me cornered fast, then moving carefully. I adjusted my grip on the shotgun, found my stance, and started walking. Slow, deliberate, checking every angle where a corridor opened and a shadow pulled against the wall. I listened. The pipes had gone quiet. That was worse. Then, from somewhere close, closer than the pipes, closer than it should have been given how recently I heard it moving, a sound rose from the ballroom that I felt before I probably heard it. Low, resonant, too heavy for any animal I'd encountered in any context outside of a panting on a concrete wall. A moo that had nothing postural about it. The kind of sound that belongs to something that had never been in the field. I turned around. It was already looking at me. The Minotaur. And there was no other word for it. No charitable interpretation that made it something else. Filled the corridor behind me with a presence that made the space feel incredibly smaller. The bull's head centered the body built for violence. The proportions wrong in every direction, and its eyes were the color of something that had been bleeding for a long time. Completely red, completely focused. It screamed. The sound hit the walls and came back from every direction at once. And then it was already moving, already covering the distance between us, and the space had no right to belong to something that size. I fired. The shot went wide. Nerves, distance, the sheer wrongness of what I was looking at, pulling my aim off that credible moan. The slug caught a tip of its right horn and blew the fur from the side of its face into patch, that was all. A scratch, an inconvenience. The Minotaur did not slow down. I can't outrun this. This thought arrived with complete clarity. Repositioning after a shot takes time I didn't have. The recoil had pushed me back. My stance had broken, and the thing was already closing remaining distance, but I was trying to recover. There was no clean angle, no clean decision available. When it swung at me, I dropped under the arc of it and brought a shotgun up like a bat. Full swing, everything I had behind it, aimed at the side of its enormous head. It felt like hitting a wall. The impact shot it up through my arms, and the Minotaur barely registered it, turning and catching me with a backswing that sent me across the walkway onto the concrete floor with a force that drove the air completely out of me. I lay there for a moment that lasted too long, looking up at the pool room ceiling, the weight of the shotgun still somehow in my hands through pure muscle memory. It was coming back. I couldn't see it probably from the floor. Couldn't aim, couldn't stand, couldn't do anything that constituted a real defense move. So I pointed the barrel with the direction of the sound and pulled the trigger without looking. The scream that followed was a complete different register than anything I knew before it. It got up. The Minotaur was moving in tight, agonized circles, its hands at its face, the sound coming out of its now high and ragged and continuous. The blind shot that had found something important. It wrecked without direction, crashing into corridor walls, leaving flesh gouges in the concrete that matched the ones I'd been reading like a short 20 minutes ago. My arms were failing. The recoil had taken something out of me that wasn't coming back quickly, and holding the shotgun at any useful angle required a consecrated act of will. I moved along the wall, putting distance between myself and its flailing, looking for a position somewhere stable, somewhere I could plant my feet and distribute the weight correctly and make the next shot count for something. I found it. A corner where two walls meet, solid in two sides, enough to brace against. I raised the shotgun. I pressed into the corner until I could feel the concrete against my shoulder blades. I found what was left of my grip and I held it, and I kept holding it and fired it until the screaming stopped. The last sound from the Minotaur was small, almost quiet, relative to anything that had come before it. And then the pool room was silent, except for the water and my own breathing, which was coming in a way that didn't feel entirely voluntarily. I sat down on the concrete floor. Then I lay down on the concrete floor. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, at the windows with their useless burning light, at their low institutional panels above me, and tried to take stock on what I still had to function on. The arms were bad, not broken, I didn't think, but a kind of wrong that announces itself loudly with every small movement. The shotgun was still with me, which felt like the most improbable part of the whole thing. Eventually, I made myself stand up and look at what I've done. The Minotaur of Minos, the myth of shame, built by a king who made every wrong decision available to him, and then built a labyrinth to hide the result. Lying on the floor of a pool room in a place with no name, defeated by someone who could barely hold a weapon correctly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt like something that had been survived by a margin too small to be proud of. I slung the shotgun across my back and stood there until my breathing evened out. Then, the exhaustion arrived all at once. The kind that doesn't ask permission, that comes after the adrenaline that finished burning and takes everything with it on the way out. My eyes wouldn't stay fully open. My legs were making suggestion that the floor that were increasingly hard to argue with. I looked at the meter, at the enormous cooling mass of it. I made a decision that I knew, as I made it, was going to seem strange in any retelling. I lay down beside it, tugged against the bulk of it, out of the open corridor, sheltered from whatever else was moving through this place, and whatever this level's version of night was, the warmth that hadn't fully left it yet. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the bathroom floor, since the hospital, since the waterfall, and everything before, I slept. The rest didn't last. One moment I was under the weight of the military stillness, finally unconscious in the only shelter in the pool room that it offered me. And then the sensation arrived like cold water down the back of the neck, specific and undeniable. Something was watching me. I opened my eyes to darkness and unfamiliar ceiling, and understood immediately that I had moved again. The space I was standing in was long and low, the kind of room that exists in the functional back end of buildings. Shelving units, running floor for ceilings on both sides, packed with canned and preserved goods in quantities that suggested a bulk storage rather than retail. The smell was familiar too, cardboard and cool air, and the faint chemical sweetness of packaged food in quantity. I knew this environment. I'd spent enough hours in spaces exactly like it during my logistic works. Grocery distribution, stock rooms, and unglamorous infrastructure behind every fully stocked shelf. Under any other circumstances, it would have been deeply unremarkable. The light was almost completely gone. Emergency level dimness, the kind that lets you see shapes and nothing else. I picked a direction based on what logic I had available and started moving, one hand treading along the shelving for orientation, listening hard. The feeling of being watched came back immediately, stronger this time. The specific quality of it, not ambient unease, but targeted, directed, and the sense of a single point of attention fixed entirely on me made me stop walking. I turned around slowly. What am I seeing? It wasn't a question by the time it left my mouth. It was more like a statement of refusal. The mind's last attempt to push back before it accepts something. In the darkness between two shelving units, catching what little light existed and returning in a red pale gleam, was an eye. A single eye, roughly a meter in diameter, hovering at roughly chest height. Its white sclera cutting through the dark like something that had learned that visibility was a form of threat. The iris was enormous, and still it pointed directly at me. It blinked, slowly, completely, the lid swooping down and back, up in motion large enough that it felt displaced air move across my face. It didn't speak. It didn't advance. It simply watched, with the patient, unblinking attention of something that had been doing this for a very long time and had developed no urgency about this whatsoever. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at the shelf beside me. Then I picked up a can. The first thing my hand found, something dense and substantial, and threw it directly at the eye. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The eye flinched back into the darkness, with a sound like air, and being displaced in a confined space, and the can hit the floor somewhere beyond it, with a clatter that echoed down the length of a storage room. For a moment, there was nothing, just the dark and the shelving and my own breathing. Then I ran. The corridors behind the storage room were a maze of the same low light functionality. More shelving, more packed goods, the occasional sign indicating departments I was moving too fast to read probably. I was looking for the light, for open space, for anything that felt less like the inside of something hunting ground. I found a wider corridor and followed it, and the eye appeared again. It came out of the wall to my left without warning, filling the space between shelving units, and the corridors around it responded, rattling. The shelving units shaking hands, vibrating against each other in a low, continuous percussion that continued very clearly and throwing into something at this creature that had no resolved the situation so much as escalated. I also noticed in that moment that the shotgun was gone. At some point between the pool room and here, between sleeping and arriving, it had simply stopped being with me. My hands were empty. I need something. The thought arrived cleanly, practically, cutting through the adrenaline with the specific focus that comes from having been in enough bad situation to know that panic is a source of drain. Then the second thought. The kitchen section, and immediately after it, the third. Wait. I stopped moving. If there was a kitchen section in this place, and the layout suggested something like a wholesale grocery distribution center, which meant yes, almost certainly, then it contained knives, but it also contained everything else a kitchen section contains. And the eye, whatever was directing the eye, could reach that section just as easily as I could. I needed to move faster than it did. Scanned the signs along the corridor ceiling until I found the one I needed. A cutlery icon, faded but legitimately. Pointing left. I went left at a speed that was just below what would have been me reckless, keeping the shelving between myself and wherever the eye had lost been. The kitchen section was exactly where this sign promised. I didn't browse. I went directly to the largest knife on the rack. The kind of built for serious work, thick spine, the blade heavy enough to feel purposeful in the hand. The type designed to get through bone when bone needed getting through. I turned around with it, and the eye was already there. Up close in the marginally better light of the kitchen section, it was worse. The iris was twitching, small, rapid movements that had nothing voluntarily about them. The eye tracking and retracking in a pattern that suggested something building toward a threshold. Rage, maybe. Or the specific instability that comes from being hit in the face with a canned gun. Then the room started throwing things at me. Not the eye directly, but around it, through it, from it. The distinction stopped mattering quickly. Tools left their hooks, utensils left their containers. Everything that wasn't bolted down found velocity and direction. And most of that direction was me. I got my arms up in a direction to protect my head from the worst of it, but not in time to avoid the worst of my arms. And it went down to one knee under the sustained impact before I found a gap and drove through it, closing this distance, driving the knife in. The eye screamed at a frequency I felt in my back teeth. Twitching reached a peak and collapsed into something more disorganized. The eye holding back and changing position, retreating through a wall and repeating it in another, moving through the space like it owned the geometry of it in ways I didn't. I stood at the kitchen section, knife in hand, breathing hard, and listened. The chainsaw started somewhere to my left. I stood very still. Who stores a chainsaw in the kitchen? I was aware, even as I said it, that I had recently retrieved a fire axe from a child's bedroom drawer and used it to break open a closet containing an eldritch entity. So my threshold for architectural surprises had technically been raised. It didn't make the chainsaw less absurd, but the sound of it, the specific mechanical rattle of it cycling up, the way it moved through the space, was giving me information. The eye was directing it, using it as an extension of myself, a limb it had acquired, a means of closing the stance of something that had stabbed it. I thought about the military, about waiting, about the moment where the patience had been more useful than force. I put the knife away and stood in the center of the room with my hands at my side. The chainsaw got louder, closer. The eye reappeared in the doorway, the saw somewhere in the darkness behind it, and I waited, counting the distance down by sound, by the feeling of the air pressure changed by every instinct I had developed across the past, however long I had been in this place. It came through the doorway. I stepped aside. The silence that followed immediate and total. I looked at what was left and decided not to look at it for long. The goal was through and specific, and the eye, as a single organism, had not benefited from the encounter with its own equipment. I filed this under experience. I would not be describing in detail to anyone and moved on. The light came on fully, for the first time, since I'd arrived in the level. Clean, flat, institutional brightness, flooding the kitchen section and the corridors beyond it all at once. The shelving looked almost ordinary in it. The signs were legible. The whole space had a slightly deflated quality of somewhere that had just stopped being dangerous and had didn't quite figured out what to be instead. Then, the edges of my vision softened and the familiar blurring came in from the periphery, and I understood I was moving again. I let it take me. water found me again. Cold this time, and deeper than before. I broke the surface already, gasping. The chill of cutting through the cold in a way the pool room hadn't. I treaded water and waited for my eyes to adjust, for my breathing to steady. Running the now familiar checklist of arriving somewhere new, with no warning and no context. Where was I? What was the space? What were the exits? Indoor swimming pool. Rectangular, modest in scale. The walls close enough that the sound of the water bouncing back quickly. Windows running along the upper portion of the walls. Frosted at the edges but clear enough in the center to show sky. Actual daylight sky. Deep and blue. And completely indifferent to any happening below it. The light in through the room was clean and almost peaceful, which felt like a trap. I swam to the edge and pulled myself out onto the concrete surround and stood there, dripping for a moment, taking in the full dimensions of the space. Small, no doors, no visible entry points, no corridors leading away from it, no signage indicating anything useful. The concrete stairs at one end were unusually high for a pool this shallow. Designed for something, presumably, though not obviously for ease of use. The water level was low, significantly lower than a functional pool would maintain, which should have been reassuring and instead felt like information I did not know how to use. I did the full circuit of the room anyway. Checked the corners, the dark sections where the light from the windows didn't reach fully, the area under the stairs. The shotgun was still gone. I'd half hoped it might have reappeared away the vodka had, tucked into a pocket by whatever logic grew on into these transitions. I hadn't. My gloves were still in my hands. Beyond that, nothing. I sat on the pool edge and listened to the silence and tried not to think about how, after everything, the eye creature, the Minotaur, Kitty's closet, the wild between the levels. This was the room that was going to bore me to death. There was something almost insulting about it. Then the machine started. Below the floor, a deep mechanical rumbling that I felt through the concrete before I heard, probably, the specific vibration of pumps cycling up, infrastructure activating, a system designed to move significant volumes of water, beginning to do exactly that. The drain wasn't opening, the water was rising. I felt it at first, my feet. A slow, cool creep across the concrete surround. The pool's surface, living with the steadiness that communicated the pumps below, had no intention of stopping. I stood up and did the math quickly, looking from the rising waterline to the window above and back again. If I stayed in this room, I was going to drown in it. That was the complete and total list of outcomes available if I didn't find a way through the glass. I looked at my hands, still gloved, with thick winter gloves. Not much, but something between my knuckles and whatever the windows were made of. The likelihood of bruising was lower with them on. The likelihood of getting through was still entirely unclear. One variable at a time. I waded to the nearest window as the water climbed past my ankles and assisted it. The glass was thick, not residential, not the kind of thing that goes with one hit. Institutional, the kind installed in places where durability matters more than aesthetics. I put my fist back and swung with everything I had. Small shots, a stress fracture running from the impact point. Not enough. The water was at my shins now, still rising with that same mechanical patience. I moved to the next window and hit it. Same results. Progress, but not enough. And the water was climbing faster than I could work through the glass one panel at a time with my bare fist. I needed more force or a better angle or both. I needed them before the waterline made reaching the windows impossible. I looked at the walls, at the architecture of the room, the way the concrete was shaped, where the structural mass sat, where I could put my back against something solid and transfer my force rather than generating it purely from my arm. The corner where the wall met the window frame, thick, loading bearing, exactly the kind of surface you could brace against. I positioned myself, shoulder against the concrete, feet planted, weight committed, and drove my punch from the shoulder rather than the elbow. The crack that came back was different, deeper, the fracture lines spreading further across the pan. But the water was past my waist now, and the windows were getting harder to reach at the right angle. And hitting glass on the water is a physics problem that does not resolve in your favor, no matter how determined you are. I stopped. I treaded water. I looked up. The ceiling had a limp along the top edge, a scoop architectural detail running the perimeter of the room, decorative probably, serving no obvious structural purpose, except that I could reach it. And if I could reach it, I could hold it. And if I could hold it while the water kept rising. I got to the wall, got my finger into the ceiling limb, and hung there with my lower body in the water, waiting. The water rose around me. The windows were half submerged now, the remaining clear glass above the waterline shrinking with every minute. I put my knees up, felt the ceiling take my weight, swung my legs back and then forward. Once, twice, building momentum, the motion of it pulling at my grip, my fingers acting against the concrete edge. The third swing, I committed everything to. Both feet, full extension, aiming at the center of the largest remaining clear pan. The glass broke. Not a crack this time, a proper failure. The pan giving away and the water behind it finding the gap immediately, pouring through in a rush that widened the opening as it went. The pressure of everything that had accumulated doing the remaining work for me. I dropped back into the water and went to work on the adjacent panels while the level in the room began, slowly, then faster, to fall. When the last of the immediate danger had drained away from the broken windows, I hung in the opening and looked out for what was on the other side. Nothing. Not nothing as in an empty room on an unlit corridor. Nothing as complete and literal absence of anything below the window. A drop into open space that extended downward until it became a question rather than a distance. Far below, visible only because the sky above was bright enough to illuminate it faintly, was something. Structures, maybe. The suggestions of a service. Too far to read clearly. Too far to judge. I looked back into the room. The water was still draining, but still present. And the pumps below hadn't stopped. And there was nothing in this room that constituted an option worth staying for. I looked back out the window. I thought about every drop I'd survived since the bathroom floor, back in the world I used to live in. Every transition between levels had been a fall of some kind. In this odd universe, or whatever this place was, seemed to have decided that falling was my primary means of transport. Maybe it was trying to tell me something. Maybe it was just cruel. I climbed through the broken window and let go. The drop was long enough to become its own kind of experience. The building, whatever the room had been housed in, fell away above me, and the sky opened up in a way that made the scale of where I was thoroughly, generally legible. There were clouds, and I fell through them, and beyond them was the ground, and the ground was approaching with a speed that stripped everything else out of my head completely. The structures below resolved as I fell. Small, geometric, arranged in patterns too regular to be accidental, too simple to be interesting. The kind of architecture that exists in dreams when your brain is building scenery without caring about whatever anyone would actually want to live within. Parallel lines, identical rooftops, the uncanny orderliness of something designed by a process rather than a person. It was beautiful in a way that wrong things sometimes are. I shut my eyes, drew my knees up, wrapped my arms around myself, and made myself as small as I could manage, while falling through open sky. And decided that whatever happened next, I had survived everything so far by trusting the process, even when the process made no sense. I trusted this one more time. The wind stopped, and the ground came back. I landed on carpet this time. Thin, slightly sticky, the kind that exists in places where spills are frequent and cleaning is periodic at best. I stayed where I was for a moment, cataloging the return of sensation in my feet and legs, and then I looked up and took it where I'd been arrived. Balloons, dozens of them, in colors that had no coherent theme. Red, gold, green, yellow. Tied to chairs and table corners, and a sad little archway near the far wall. Round tables, covered in paper cloths, porcelain plates, arranged with the approximate core of someone who had been told to set a table and had done so without enthusiasm. A banner, slightly crooked, in letters that were almost festive. A children's birthday party. Empty, still, frozen mind preparation for an event that had neither not yet started or will never start. Dude, I said to the room, you want to do this with me right now? The room did not respond. The balloons shifted slightly in air that wasn't moving. I did this search anyway, habit by now. The automatic inventory taking that this universe specifically had trained into me across however many levels this was. Check the tables, the chairs, the sad little serving station in the corner, with its stacked napkins and plastic cutlery. Nothing useful, not a weapon, not a tool, not even anything heavy enough to serve as one. I stood in the middle of the birthday party and felt the isolation of it settling around me. It was a specific kind of wrong, not dangerous in any way I could point to, not threatening in the direction that I can defend against. Just empty in a way that had texture to it. The decoration made it worse somehow. The attempting at cheerfulness sitting on top of silence like something didn't fit. I picked up a chair and threw it against the wall. Then another one. I swept the porcelain off the nearest table and listened to it shatter against the floor, which happened slightly, and then I put the banner down, which happened slightly more. I walked through the room with the focused energy of someone who had survived the drowning, a minotaur, an eye creature with a chainsaw, and the void between worlds, and had now been deposited in a children's birthday party, with no accents and nothing to do. Eventually, I found the door. It was just there, tucked into the far wall, plain, unremarkable, the kind of door you stop seeing because it looks like it belongs. I hadn't noticed it during the search because it made looking for something more obvious. I kicked it open with everything I had, mostly out of principle. The room beyond it stopped me completely. Massive. The scale of it was the first thing. Ceiling high enough that the upper portions dissolve into the neon lit air above. The floor sprawling outward in every direction further than I could take in at once. Warm colors on the walls, deep oranges and rich purples, and a specific saturated palette of somewhere designed to feel exciting at all hours. Arcade machines in rows and clusters, screens glowing with attract mode animations, the ambient soundscape of 100 games running simultaneously, creating a frequency that was almost musical. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let it land. Which builds this, I thought? Who designs a completely unhinged birthday room with a secret door that opens into this? Whatever the answer was, I had earned this. Whatever logic governing this weird universe had apparently decided that after everything, the grief, the hospital, the void, the creatures, the drowning, I was owned on arcade. I was not going to argue. I went fully, completely, and without any remaining dignity into gaming mode. Machine to machine. No strategy, no restraint. Whatever looked interesting, whatever had a joystick or a button or a steering wheel. Racing games and fighting games and light gun games. And things I couldn't identify that were clearly from somewhere the concept of genre hadn't reached yet. The screens were vivid and the controls were responsive, and for a stretch of time that I could measure, I didn't try to. I was just a person playing games in an arcade, which is one of the simplest and most complete forms of being alive that exists. The snacks section was stocked, and I didn't ask questions about that either. I ate whatever was there, with the appetite of someone who had been surviving on food left by supernatural entities and had anything chosen freely in what felt like a long time. It was good, genuinely. Straightforwardly good. And I sat on the floor between two machines. And I didn't think about anything for a while. I explored every section of the space, found new rooms, branching off the main floor, more games, different configurations, one area that seemed to be themed around something I couldn't identify, but committed fully anyway. The place rewarded exploration, in the way good spaces do, offering something new each time I thought I'd seen everything. And then, gradually, I didn't anymore. The shift was subtle at first. A game I'd already played, a corridor I recognized, the snack section offering nothing I hadn't already had. The ceiling lights cycling through the sequence in a pattern I'd started to anticipate. The dopamine had found its floor. I sat down at the machine I'd already completed twice and stared at the track screen and felt a specific flatness that sets when stimulation had run past the point of pleasure and started running on empty. The colors were the same colors, the sounds were the same sounds. Everything had felt like an abundance an hour ago and had the quality of a loop. Present, functional, and completely unable to give me anything I had already taken from it. I got up and kicked the machine. Not hard, not enough to damage it, just hard enough to feel something with edges. I explored the remaining sections I've been saving when they were fine, and was bored, and the boredom had the mean quality to it. The kind that comes from having been given something good and used to it. I thought about the birthday room, the crooked banner, the mismatched balloons, the porcelain plates arranged by someone or something that had been trying badly to replicate an experience it had seen from its outside. It was wrong in every specific way and was completely generally, authentically strange. The arcade was impressive, but impressive had gotten old. You know what? I said to nobody. Let me go back. I went back through the door into the birthday room and stood in the middle of the wreckage I made it earlier. The broken plates, the pulled-down banner, the chairs at wrong angles, and looked at it probably for the first time. There was something here in the wrongness of it, in the way it had been assembled with genuine effort towards something it didn't quite understand. The danger class on this level was 101, and I still had no idea that the threat was nothing had tried to harm me. Nothing had chased me or grown from the walls, accumulated through distortion. I stood in a ruined birthday room and waited and listened and wondered what was the most dangerous thing in here actually was. I went back to the arcade because the birthday room had nothing left to show me either. There was the honest truth of it. I'd exhausted both spaces. The deliberately wrong one and the deliberately overwhelming one. And what remained, the specific restlessness of someone with nowhere to be and nothing to do about it. I found a corner of the arcade with soft light and decided that sleeping was the most productive thing available to me. I was wrong about it. I noticed the door first. Not gone, but dramatically sealed or blocked. Just wrong. The geometry where they exist was simply wall now, continuous and unmarked, as though the doors had already existed and the room had always been exactly this shape. I walked the perimeter twice the way I had in every room, before this one pressed my hands against the surface, looking for the seam or hinge or handle that would confirm I was mistaken. The light changed next. The warm neon that felt generous an hour ago shifted, deepening, darkening, the colors bleeding towards something that had no business. Within an arcade, red where there had been orange, black where there had been purple. The machines kept running, their ad-track screens cycling through animations that were no longer quite right. The sounds they reproduce dropped in pitch by increasements too small to identify precisely, but impossible to ignore. Then the walls. The color that spread across them was not paint and not light. It moved with the specific unhurried confidence of something that had knew at the time, darkening the room from the edges inward. I stood in the center of it and felt something in my body respond before my mind had finished processing what I was seeing. Wrong. Everything was wrong. The 0+% danger class that it seemed like a little joke, lower than Kitty's room, lower than any level I'd passed through, wasn't a joke at all. It was a warning written in a language I'd only just learned to read. He appeared at the far end of the room. Yellow jumpsuit, human-shaped, human size, carrying a box wrapped in the specific neatness of someone who wanted to present sensation to mean something. He walked toward me without hurrying, which was worse if he had run, and I became aware as he crossed the room that the air itself was changing around me. A heaviness setting into my joints, my bones registering something that had no name in any medical context I encountered. Not pain yet, the promise of pain, the specific announcement of something that at the cellular level was being addressed without my consent. By the time he reached me, I was already on my knees. Dick came with preamble, my face full force, and the floor came up to meet me with a generosity it hadn't shown me before. It hit hard, and blood came immediately, more than I expected, spreading across the arcade floor in a quantity that frightened me in a way that the military and the eye creature in the drowning room hadn't quite managed. Those had been external threats. This felt internal, like being taken apart in the inside while someone watched.
Check out what I've got for you,
he said. He set the box down in front of me and stepped back, and I looked at it from the floor, and something in my chest understood what was inside before the lid came out. Kitty's axe. The one I found in a child's bedroom drawer, in a pink room that felt like a fever dream in another life. The one I'd given freely to something enormous and dark that I'd asked politely and said thank you. It lay in the box looking exactly as I at the moment handed it over. Well made, well weighted, the grain of the handle catching the graded light of the diner arcade. He picked it up. He looked at me. He began to close the distance. I crawled. There was no dignity in it, and I wasn't looking for any. I moved across the arcade floor, and my hands and knees with whatever the radiation of the wrongness or whatever he was doing to me from the inside left available, putting distance between myself and the X-swings that came close enough, and I felt the air move against my face each time. I had stopped building my tolerance against danger, somewhere between Kitty's room and the pool room and the eye and the drowning. I made the quiet, unconscious decision that I understood this place well enough to navigate it. And that decision had left me here, weaponless, weakening, on the floor of a room that had locked itself around me. The swings kept missing, not because I was fast enough. I wasn't, but because he wasn't trying to end it quickly. And that was somehow the most frightening part. He had time, whatever here was. He had all the time in the world, and had whatever my body had left, which was becoming a smaller number with every passing minute. The cancer, if that's what it was, if that word even applied to whatever was happening to me inside, was eating through me with a patience that matched his. I could feel it the way you feel a fever at its peak. That specific interior heat of a body fighting something that isn't going to win against. I stopped moving. Not a decision exactly, more an arrival. The moment where the body and the mind reach the same conclusion from different directions and meet in the middle. I had fought everything this place had put in front of me, had given what I had to give each at time, and what I had left right now was not enough, and I was finished pretending it otherwise. I lay still on the arcade floor and closed my eyes and waited. The swing didn't come. Instead, silence. Specific quality of silence that right when a sound you'd stop consciously hearing suddenly stops. I opened my eyes. The jumpsuit figure was still, not moving, still, not pausing still, the kind of still that means something has changed in his situation rather than mine. I turned my head. Kitty was behind him. She had come through the wall, the way she had come through the closet, without announcement, without dramatic entrance, simply present in a space she hadn't been in the moment before. Her impossible height filling the upper portion of the arcade with that absolute darkness that absorbed everything around it. Her hand was through his chest. The axe was on the floor. He made no sound. He simply stopped. Kitty withdrew her hand and looked down at me with whatever she had instead of eyes. And the distortion came, softer, and I remembered it with a frequency that had warmth in it.
You are safe by my side.
She crunched, the motion of it vast and unhurried, and her voice, it could be called that, continued with the careful deliberateness of something that had been thinking about it, wanted to say.
Knowing what kind of soul you are, how respectful, how willing to give without knowing what giving would cost you. It is my duty to protect you at all costs.
The axe had found in Chad's bedroom. The axe had almost kept because keeping it felt safer. The axe that had owned over to something enormous and unknown because the situation had called for trust and had chosen to trust. It was hers. It has always been hers. Now it will be used in my name. She brought me back through this arcade. The real one. The one that had felt like a gift before a little question mark had revealed what was underneath it. The overwhelming neon that it curd-pled. It is something hostile. Was different now. The lights lowered and warmth and whatever Kitty adjusted with her vast dark hands. The space settling into something that felt, for the first time in all this, like somewhere I might actually stay. She treated my injuries with the same unhurried gentleness she'd used when she first touched me, my back in the birthday room. And I let her, and I didn't ask how she knew what to do or what she was doing with it. Some things in this place operated on a logic that rewarded acceptance more than an investigation. When she finished me, she sat beside me, the enormous, patient, absolute darkness of her, filling half the room, and spoke.
That's the safest place we can be. Level 3999 is largely unbounded, and it is especially safe under my watch.
She paused.
You were in level ? Someone had been manipulating the danger classifications, making the harmless appear lethal and the lethal appear like nothing. You were never supposed to read those numbers as reliable. Not here.
I lay, because against the arcade floor, and looked up at the ceiling and thought about that. About the 101% birthday room that had wanted nothing from me. About the 0% that had nearly finished what everything else had started.
Rest.
Kitty said.
Your bones need days. Your muscles need longer. Let them have what they need.
I rested. For the first time since the waterfall, since him, since the hospital, since the bathroom floor that had started all of this, I rested. Without waiting for something to interrupt, the arcade hummed quietly around me. Kitty was present in the way that large, patient things are present. Not intrusively, not demandingly, just there, a constant, in a place that offered a very few of those. I thought about home, about what home had been, and what it has now, and whatever those things were the same place anymore. The world I'd left was out there, somewhere above the levels. Above the falling and the water and the corridors that didn't follow rules. It didn't know what it was, what would take to reach, whatever reaching was even the right goal. But I was alive. Improbably, repeatedly, against the specific wishes of several things that I tried very hard to change that. I was alive. Level 3999, Kitty had said. One of the most unbothered places you can be. It will do, for now. It will do. I looked over her, at the vast dark shape of her, the axe resting across her hands, like something precious, which it was, and thought about the morning in a pink bedroom when I stood at the threshold of a closet and made a decision about trust. It had been the right choice. Me and Kitty, I thought. Whatever comes next, me and Kitty. Arcade lights hummed their warm colors across the ceiling, and I closed my eyes. At the first time in all of it, the dog felt safe. So I just wanna thank you all guys for watching the 120 minutes of this video, because it has been so extremely agonizing recording that whole thing. So this is what is an immense endurance test for my vocal cords, and I'm extremely proud of the result that I can share you all. Currently, I wanna tell you guys that I'm doing a 3-week hiatus, meaning I won't be recording or uploading anything to the channel. But I make sure that I'm gonna write more narrations for the video for you guys to be ready to watch them. Also, to fill the actual 2-hour video, I decided to show you all another part of my creativity of playing music, and I want you all to know if you're cool with it, if I can also upload parts of my music, even if it's just me noodling around on my instruments and all that stuff. Overall, I'm extremely thankful if y'all can show some love and support, even if it's just clicking some buttons or even just setting some comments for me, even just critics. I'm really open to that. And so, may I show you the outro of this video.